can see in this painting here, I changed quite a bit from the photo. I made there be less sand and more water. I also took out a lot of these kayakers. When you're painting landscapes, if you try and copy the photo exactly, it's just going to mess you up in so many different ways. For example, the odds of the composition working are so slim. Things aren't just perfectly arranged out there for good compositions. You have to move things and change things. Now, if you want to know exactly how I came up with the composition for this painting, then you should definitely sign up for Paint Week. That's right, Paint Week is back. It's going to be starting November 6th through the 11th. It's completely free, and in it, I'm going to walk you through this painting from start to finish, from the initial pencil value sketch to the underpainting to the block in, all the way to the final painting. I'm also gonna have lectures and demos in there on compositions, greens, and edges. And on the last day of Paint Week, I'm gonna be hosting a live Q&A session on Zoom. Again, it's totally free to sign up and go through it. Last time I had over 3,000 people join. There also will be a private Facebook group where you can submit photos of your paintings for possible critique in that end Q&A video. And also just ask questions and be part of a positive painting community. I'll be working in oils, but if you're working in acrylics, that's fine too. The link to sign up and get the supply list is in the description of this video. And all the tips in this video are going to be related to what I'm going to teach in Paint Week. So let's move on to tip number 2, which is always do a pencil sketch to figure out the value composition. See, values are the first thing a viewer takes in when they look at your painting. If you ever walk into a museum or a gallery and you look across the room at a painting, you're not really picking up the colors, you're just picking up the composition of value shapes. That's the shapes of dark and light. And that's really the core foundation of a painting, and you really wanna get that right. For the longest time, I always wondered how certain painters that I'd see that I admired their landscapes created such good landscapes, but they were just so simple, like there wasn't much to them. And looking back now, it's because they knew composition. They knew where to place things. It's not just about trying to throw as many things into a scene as possible or as much detail as possible. It's knowing where to place things and how to guide the viewer's eye through the painting. And if you take just 15 minutes to do a small value sketch and figure out the composition with just 3 values, a dark, a midtone, and a light, it's going to save you hours and hours of painting on the canvas and reworking it and that doesn't work, it doesn't look right. So trust me, take the time to learn composition and understand how to do a simple value sketch. Now, speaking of values, that brings me to tip number 3, which is have a focal point. For the longest time, I never really fully understood what a focal point was and what makes it the focal point. And kind of where I'm at on this is that a focal point a lot of times is the area of highest contrast. So whenever I do a landscape, I try and make the only area where the lightest light and darkest dark touch be the focal point. So you can see in this sketch, I have darks, I have midtones, I have lights, but the only place where a light touches a dark is my focal point, which is this kayaker. See, you don't have to paint the photo exactly. You're not a copying machine, you're an artist. And part of your job as an artist is to make decisions. All right, tip number 4 is tone your canvas. Now for landscapes, I like to tone my canvas with a mixture of burnt sienna and ultramarine blue. So use some paint thinner, put it on, wipe it with a paper towel. The paint is thin enough that it sets up pretty quickly and I can paint right over top of it. But just starting on a neutral value, it shouldn't be too dark, it shouldn't be too light. It's going to help you gauge values. Because if you start with just a plain white canvas, every value that you put on it is going to look dark because it's next to white. Now, some painters like to have a warmer tone with their landscape. Some do kind of tones or colors that are going to be in the painting. I kind of like to just have a neutral. I don't want it to be too cool or too warm, which I feel like with this ultramarine blue and burnt sienna mixture achieves that. I guess you could say it's very similar to a burnt umber, which is commonly used for toning canvases and underpaintings. Now, speaking of underpaintings, that brings me to tip number 5, which is do a value map. Now, I like to call this a value map. Some might call it an underpainting. I guess it is an underpainting, but I just like to use that same mixture that I use to tone my canvas to pretty much transfer what I sketched out as far as my value composition. The tone of the canvas is going to be my mid-tone. I'm going to use a little bit more of that mixture to make the darks, and I'm going to take some paper towel and some paint thinner and wipe off areas for my lights. Just transferring that value map is going to help keep you on track value-wise for when you do put in color. Because the last thing you want to do is spend the time to create a value sketch and a good value composition And then when it comes time to paint and put in color, you completely lose it and you just paint whatever, and now you don't have that value composition as the structure you're painting. All right, tip number 6 is when you do start to use color, block out the entire painting with flat color. So you're pretty much translating your value map into color. So you're finding the big colors for everything, but what's most important is the values. Meaning once you're done with this stage and the canvas is completely covered with paint, you should be able to take a photo of your painting and put it in black and white, and the value map should be the same as your pencil sketch. Another little trick you can do is get some red film and look at your painting through that red film, which helps you see just the values. I always say if you can't get your painting to work to a certain degree and look good by the end of this stage, then that's a signal that something's off. Most likely a value is off. And you need to go back in and fix it and get it to work now while everything is just simple flat shapes. I like to call this working easy to hard. Okay, tip number 7 is desaturate your greens. I was taught this a very, very long time ago. I don't even know who first told me, but there's no green in nature that is just green straight out of the tube. Now, I don't have a green on my palette, so I'm just mixing ultramarine blue and cadmium lemon to get a green, which is pretty much like a green straight out of the tube. And there's just nothing in nature that's gonna really be that color. So you always wanna desaturate it with green's complement, which is red. Now, I do have an entire demo on mixing greens in Paint Week, so I'll get into that further. But just know right from the start, you're gonna have to desaturate your greens, whether you're painting grass, trees, anything. Now, speaking of color complements, I'm gonna move on to tip number 8, which is always look to push color complements in a landscape. Remember, you're an artist and you have to be making decisions. You don't have to adhere to the photo exactly. Like for here, I decided to only keep this one kayaker, but I wanted them to have the red kayak to kind of contrast well with all the greens that are in this landscape. And especially it being the focal point, I knew this was a good decision. A lot of times the focal point can be indicated by the main area where color complements are next to each other and, you know, playing off one another. All right, tip number 9 is use edges to your advantage. A lot of times with beginner painters, I see them only using hard edges. That means where two shapes come together, two colors, it's just a hard edge. And a lot of that comes from being afraid to work wet into wet paint. For example, an easy way to portray the fluidity of water is to have soft edges. So a lot of times I'll work wet into wet paint and blend those edges together. Whereas if I'm painting something that's solid and concrete, like this kayak, it's like a solid object, it's this plastic kayak. I want a hard edge, so I make sure to have that when I paint that subject. Or these mangroves, they're a bunch of different leaves, so I'll cut back into them and break up the edge and have more of a broken edge for those leaves. And for the leaves way in the distance, I'll use soft edges again. All right, and tip number 10 is know where the light is coming from. Because when it comes time to putting in smaller shapes to create form, the photo might not always tell you exactly where to put these lighter shapes. For example, with these mangroves, it's kind of hard to tell what's going on value-wise, but since I know the sun is coming from above and probably slightly to the left, I can then coordinate my lighter shapes to more on top of these mangroves and have more darks towards the bottom. And just doing that small thing a little bit will keep these mangroves from looking flat and make them look more round and have more volume. And again, this is reason 1000 whatever for why you can't copy the photo exactly. All right, don't forget to sign up for Paint Week. Again, completely free. Link to sign up is in the description of this video. And when you sign up, you'll get the supply list. If you have any questions about Paint Week, feel free to ask those in the comments section below this video and I'll do my best to answer them. I'm Chris Fornatero, here telling you to go get painting.